My name is William, and tonight we enter Moscow, at the moment when a ruler's deepest tenderness began to turn into terror. Ivan was not yet the figure, later remembered as terrible. He was a young Tsar trying to shape a vast and restless realm, and beside him stood Anastasia Romanovna, the woman many believed steadied his heart. When she died, something in him seemed to break, and Russia would feel the fracture. To understand the tragedy, we must first see the world around them. The court of Muscovy was not a soft place. It was a world of fur-lined robes, heavy icons, candle smoke, painted chambers, and men who measured honor by nearness to the throne. Noble families watched one another with careful eyes. Alliances formed over marriages, offices, estates, and whispered promises. A ruler could be crowned in sacred splendor and still feel surrounded by danger. Ivan had known danger early. His childhood was marked by the death of parents, the cruelty of factions, and the cold education of suspicion. Boyar families struggled around the throne, while the young prince learned that affection could vanish and loyalty could be performed without being real. That is why Anastasia matters. She entered his life not merely as a bride, but as a kind of shelter. She came from the Romanov family, then not yet the dynasty would later become. Accounts remember her as gentle, pious, and calming, though royal women were often described through ideals expected of them. Still, her reputation is striking. She was not remembered as a noisy force, but as a quiet one, and sometimes quiet influence is the strongest of all. Picture the Kremlin in winter, snow pressed against the outer walls, lamps burned before icons. The scent of wax, incense, and damp wool filled stone corridors. A young Tsar passed through rooms where everyone bowed, yet few could be trusted. Then a private chamber, softer and warmer, guarded from the public struggle. Anastasia there, not as a minister or soldier, but as a presence that made the world less hostile. The full story behind this might surprise you, because their marriage was not simply sentimental. It was political in the deepest sense. If Anastasia soothed Ivan, her calm had consequences. If she gave him a place where he did not feel hunted, that too was service to Russia. Ivan's early reign held signs of order and ambition. He gathered advisors, strengthened rule, and tried to command both church and nobility. There were reforms, campaigns, and grand ideas of sacred kingship, yet beneath that structure lay a temperament shaped by old wounds. The question was always there. Would power heal him or enlarge the injuries within him? Anastasia seemed for a time to keep the darker currents from rising too far. She bore children, shared the sacred theater of court life, and stood near the center of a realm, learning what it meant to be ruled by a Tsar. To the boyars, she may have appeared as one more piece in the courtly pattern. To Ivan, she seems to have been far more. She was trust in a world built on doubt, and then she fell ill. The sources are not simple, and the centuries have filled the space with argument. Some accounts suggest illness. Ivan himself came to believe she had been poisoned by enemies at court. Later examinations have raised questions because traces of dangerous substances were found in her remains, though what that proves is still debated. In history, suspicion can survive long after certainty has died. What matters is the effect on Ivan. He did not merely lose a wife. He lost the one person many believed had restrained the most volatile part of him. Grief entered a mind already trained to fear betrayal, and there it found old rooms waiting open. The death of Anastasia became, for him, not only sorrow, but evidence. Someone had taken her, someone close, someone smiling. Here is the terrible pivot of the story. A grieving husband may search for comfort. A grieving autocrat searches for culprits. In an ordinary household, suspicion can destroy a family. In a throne room, it can destroy a country. Ivan's private agony began to move outward into law, punishment, and the machinery of fear. The court changed temperature. Men who had once approached the Tsar with careful confidence now faced a ruler whose trust was shrinking by the day. Boyars became suspect, old advisors fell away, silence grew heavier. A glance might be read as treason. A delay might suggest conspiracy. The private wound of one death spread through the public body of the state, yet the truth is even more astonishing. Ivan did not become terrible in one instant. That is not how human beings usually break. The change came through grief, memory, faith, anger, illness, and power feeding one another. He withdrew, accused, returned, and demanded a new kind of obedience. The realm was forced to answer not only a ruler, but a ruler who believed the hidden world had betrayed him. From this darkness came the oprichnina, one of the most frightening turns of his reign. Ivan created a separate domain, and a force bound directly to him. These men, the oprichniki, became instruments of suspicion and terror. They wore the image of loyalty, but their purpose was to cut through the old nobility and answer only to the Tsar's will. The old courtly world was now inverted. Instead of rank protecting families, rank could mark them for danger. Instead of ceremony calming the realm, ceremony could clothe fear in sacred language. Incense still rose in churches, bells still sounded across Moscow. But behind the beauty moved a colder truth. Trust had been replaced by accusation. One of the darkest episodes came in the punishment of Novgorod, where Ivan believed treachery had taken root. The details in sources can be harsh and contested, but the meaning is clear. His suspicion no longer stayed in the palace. It traveled across the land. A ruler's grief had become a principle of government, and government had become a theater of dread. It would be too simple to say Anastasia's death alone caused everything. Russia was already filled with noble rivalry, war pressure, religious intensity, and the brutal logic of autocracy. Ivan carried wounds from childhood long before he lost her, but her death gave those wounds a shape. It gave them a name. It allowed fear to say, "I was right all along." That is the heartbreak. Anastasia is remembered less for what she did than for what seemed to happen when she was gone. Her absence became powerful. In life, she may have steadied Ivan. In death, she became the proof of betrayal he could not stop seeing. A woman of quiet influence left a silence loud enough to echo through a rain. Think of Ivan after her loss, not as a monster from a painting, but as a man alone inside a sacred office, surrounded by courtiers he no longer believed, and memories that sharpened instead of faded. Power did not comfort him. It gave his grief weapons. The crown did not save the heart, it armed the wound. And what of the people around him? They learned to live beneath uncertainty. Noble families calculated survival. Servants listened for changes in mood. The palace itself became a place where grief had turned architectural, built into doors, guards, corridors, and silence. A private loss had remade the emotional weather of an empire. So what did Anastasia's death unleash? Not evil from nowhere, and not madness in a simple sense, but the collapse of a fragile restraint. It broke the bond between Ivan and trust. It allowed old fears to become policy. It turned the memory of devotion into a justification for suspicion. And once suspicion sits beside absolute power, mercy becomes difficult to find. In the end, Ivan and Anastasia's story is not only about love and loss, it is about what happens when the person who softens power disappears. It is about the terrible burden placed on private affection when an entire realm depends on the temper of one wounded ruler. Their marriage may have given Muscovy a brief vision of steadiness. Her death darkened the road that followed. If this story made you see Ivan differently, tell me what you think below. Was Anastasia the last guardrail between a wounded ruler and a frightened realm? Or was Russia already moving toward darkness before she was gone? If you found this journey moving, leave a like and join me again for more stories where duty, reputation, and heartbreak meet behind palace walls. History often hides its deepest sorrow in the moment when devotion disappears and power is left alone with grief.